Looks okay?
Yeah, anytime you're ready.
Anytime, all right. All right, well, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Matt Hardy. I've been a teacher in Eden Prairie for the last 8 years, and I'm also the co-founder of a company called Kidblog. And so my talk today is called Audience Matters, Content Creation and Connecting in a Flat Digital World, which is sort of a fancy way of saying that giving kids a voice can make a big difference in their education, in their lives, in the way teachers teach and kids learn, and it may have something to say about where education may be going in the future. So this is a little bit of my story, and that story starts in my 4th grade classroom. And here we are, and in case you're wondering, yes, I did teach boys and girls. It's just hard to get them together to hug for a photograph, so there's a few more of them. And I actually didn't always know that I wanted to be a teacher. I guess I always assumed that if you became a teacher, you always knew since you were about 3 years old. That wasn't the case for me, so my story actually starts a little bit prior to that in computer science. I got my degree in computers, and I was going to be a software engineer, and unfortunately along the way I had a very traumatic experience, and that was that I watched the movie Office Space. And I realized that after I had an internship at a local software company in Roseville, that this scene, which was my life for that summer, was not just my summer, it was going to be my life, like long term. So I realized I didn't want to work for Bill Lumberg for the rest of my life and in a little cage like this. So I decided to make use of my interpersonal skills and go into education. And so it was a great fit. And I was always able to blend, which was fortunate. I was able to blend my technology background with my educational efforts. And so I had something like this, and I walked on the scene in 2004, and I not only had a website, I had a vanity domain named mrhardy.org. And people, I think that alone, parents thought, this guy's got his act together, new teacher, he's fine, right? I didn't get a lot of parent phone calls about stuff, but I think they just figured, hey, I must have my act together. So, and throughout my teaching efforts, I was always trying to integrate technology, right? Tech guy and whatever. And so here we are, Skyping with a kind of a docent from Ellis Island. So we were doing a sort of a simulation about immigration for one of our units. And so we actually Skyped with somebody from New York City and who sort of led us through a tour of Ellis Island, like virtually, right? So it's kind of this cool digital integration piece. The nagging thing that was always sort of getting to me, however, was that there was this, as digital as I tried to be, there was always this really analog undercurrent that was flowing throughout my classroom, and it looked a lot like that. And so a lot of my workflow as a teacher was based around giving students, assignments and opportunities to reflect on their learning, and where did they document that? Where did they store that information and that reflection? In paper notebooks like this. And so that's maybe a little bit of an exaggeration of how many of those I was lugging home every day after school, but that's a good representation. And actually the biggest problem that I had as a teacher from sort of a workflow standpoint was not all the notebooks that were in that stack, but the one that wasn't. And figuring out where that thing was and who was missing and how do we get them caught up. And so this paper workflow, it occurred to me, was just really outdated and really inefficient in terms of doing what we wanted to do, which is document our learning, reflect on what we're doing, and articulate things that we now know and maybe what we want to know going forward as a class. So my goal was to get rid of this paper world. So it was actually very selfish at the beginning. It was less about my students, frankly, and more about me being able to manage all of this content. And so I knew that I wanted to basically go from this paper madness to a digital workflow. At the time, this was about 4 years ago, everybody was talking about blogs, get your kids blogging and wikis and da-da-da-da-da. And it seemed like a logical thing to do, right? Like finally get a digital home for a lot of this content. And what I realized was as much as people were talking about bringing your students sort of online into the cloud, into this digital realm, there actually weren't any platforms available that gave teachers, especially teachers of elementary students like me, the peace of mind that whatever content we were creating, I was still sort of the gatekeeper of that content from a security and from just a privacy kind of angle. And so I couldn't believe that there was nothing out there that met my needs. And so I created something that met my needs. I sort of met my own problem. And so I created a service called Kidblog. It started in my class. And this is an example of Anna doing some work on her Bud Not Buddy sort of book report that we had here. And you can see that over the course of the year, this was sort of later in the year, that she had 63 published posts, and she left 200 comments on other people's work, and she received 179 of her own comments from other people about her efforts. And this is just one student. We had thousands of posts and thousands of comments that started flowing in our classroom because of our ability to go digital and create interactions that way. And so this is just showing that this wasn't just my class, because when I released this to the public, teachers started going crazy for this thing, and they realized, like, oh, it wasn't just me that had this problem, it was a lot of people, a lot of teachers out there. And so right now, Kidblog is at over 2.4 million users, and we're all over the world. And so there's something going on here. And the question that I always was interested in is, like, what is driving all of this? And I think it's something that's subtle, but really important. And that's because for ages, we've been teaching the writing process, and publishing has always been sort of an afterthought. And literally, in the case of this model here, this traits of writing, it's literally an afterthought. They published this model called the 6 traits of writing, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And teachers weren't adopting it, they weren't buying it. And they got some feedback and said, well, students are doing all of this work, but they're not actually showing it to anybody. They're not actually presenting their work. So literally, the company said, oh, okay, well, we'll just change it. Now it's called the 6+1 traits of writing. And so it's like publishing is literally an afterthought when it comes to students creating content and actually sharing what they know with not just their peers, but maybe with a broader global audience. And so even if it's, for me, it was more of a concrete sequential, I was more of a concrete sequential kind of guy. So the writing process, for me, I liked this idea of, okay, start with some pre-writing and then get your ideas down and then adjust them and then fine tune it. And then we'll kind of take a closer look at it and see how we did, and then we'll publish it. Well, you realize that, as a student, you're starting here, you just see this gauntlet that you have to run. And maybe if you're lucky, someone will get to see what you did. And it's sort of no wonder that students aren't motivated to write when this is the kind of model that we throw at them, when, again, it's literally an afterthought. And so what's exciting about using blogs as a platform for displaying this evidence of learning and students creating content is that publishing is literally always one click away. It's not like this sort of light at the end of the tunnel that you're hoping to find. It's like whatever I'm creating right now has the potential. I don't have to publish it, but at least it has that potential, and it's right there, and it's under my control what I publish. And so Kidblog is a platform that facilitates this for students in a really easy to use way, and lets teachers manage that content in safe and secure ways. So it's not really, this talk isn't really about Kidblog, it's about just this idea that publishing is a proxy for actually finding an audience for your writing. And that audience may be your class, it may be a global audience. The point is that it's bigger than just the teacher. And so now, instead of me just being the source of all feedback on writing that students are doing, right, taking these notebooks and literally writing a comment to every student every day, everything they do, now I can sort of distribute that, and students publish this content, and now as a community of learners, we're coming together, and everybody's commenting on each other's work, and it becomes this really beautiful ecosystem where students are engaged with not just what they're doing, but what everybody else is doing. And so you start to create this really amazing community. And so I've got just a couple of examples of some things that students have done in this kind of platform. And so this was a student that was the shyest student in my class, perhaps the shyest student I've ever had, and would not to be rude, he wasn't being rude, but he would not or could not speak to you if you came up and approached him. He would literally turn his back. And so there was some social, emotional stuff going on there. And his blog provided this venue for him to actually communicate with his peers and with the world. And it turned into this amazing transformational experience where now the student that everybody thought was just kind of a loner or didn't have much to say or much to contribute, now they're discovering the things that he can do. Like in this case, he created this Lego robot gyroscopic, almost like Segway thing that he did at his house and just filmed it. This is his actual creation, filmed it, doing its sort of little Segway dance, right? And put it on his blog, and now all of a sudden students are asking him questions via the blog, via the comments, and he's responding to them. So it's almost like this scaffolded way for him to break out of his shell a little bit. And by the end of the year, he became one of sort of the most, I'll say, popular bloggers in the class, a student that otherwise wouldn't have said a word to you if you'd really tried to pull it out of him. So it doesn't just, it's not just the sake of showing a cool video of your Legos. It's actually, this stuff can actually change kids' lives. Here's a case where a family came in before the first day of school and said, Mr. Hardy, my son loves you, but hates school. How's that for a welcome to 5th grade? And I said, all right, well, I guess the challenge is on here. It's my opportunity now to get him to engage with school and like that as well. And so his blog, even before I really formally introduced it to the class, he sort of discovered this thing and realized, hey, I can actually sort of publish some things here and just sort of put them out to the class and see what happens. And what he did was sort of, I don't know if you can tell, this is sort of this basement workshop kind of thing. And he basically showed to his peers that he was like this carpenter that could make these really interesting crafts. Like this is actually a footstool that he made by like gluing bottle caps to the bottom of this box and then like screwing the bottles into the bottom. Now, I'm not sure the actual safety of using a footstool like supported by glass bottles, but you know, I wouldn't stand on this, but he could, and it worked fine. And the point is that he was actually, even before I like assigned any of this work, he was the most prolific blogger in my class because he was actually sharing things with his peers that he actually cared about. And the only restraint I put on it, that this was our learning portfolio. And so with that kind of heuristic, you know, if we started seeing stuff about like Justin Bieber or do you want to come over to my house later and play, like those kinds of things, that didn't really count as a learning, you know, documentation. But this certainly did. And sort of the beauty that I started to realize was that this actually had nothing to do with school. And so that's sort of humbling in a way to realize, you know, this school facilitated platform is actually being used by students to show what they're doing outside of school, which in the end I think is really kind of a special way of looking at it. This is an example, sort of started out as sort of a negative thing for me, where I was on Twitter, you know, I monitor my like Kidblog Twitter feed or whatever, and you know, a high school student actually had a Twitter account and had tweeted, "Oh, I hate this Kidblog assignment." Oh, what? How could you say that? Kidblog is amazing. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. And so I had to dig a little deeper. So I clicked on this student's profile. I didn't have anything else to say about Kidblog, but I just wanted to dig in a little deeper to what this person was up to. And so I looked at this profile, and there was a link under his name that said, hey, go to this website and check out my mixtapes that I made. Like, okay, I will. Click. And so I go to this website, and it's basically like this opportunity where you can record. So in this case, it was like these hip hop or rap kind of demo tape almost, and just upload it and get kind of like feedback on what you're doing. And he was, part of the text that he had associated with his profile on this website was like, hey, this is my mixtapes, like I hope you like them, please don't be too harsh, this is kind of my first try at this, but I wanted to get this out there and just see what people thought. And so what I realized was, even while he was sort of besmirching the Kidblog publicly, privately, or at least in another venue, he was doing the exact same thing that Kidblog aims to achieve, which is give yourself a voice and an audience. And so sort of turned a negative into a positive for that. This was just another example of almost 1 million students coming together for this International Dot Day. And so what teachers were able to do was actually use hand-drawn kinds of media here. So just going digital doesn't mean you lose some of that natural media in the arts and things like that. And they just either took a photo or scanned this in. And this is one student that is basically saying, here's how I would make my mark on the world, one little thing that I could do. And so she said, the way I'll make my mark on the world is by greeting people. The reason I'm making this my mark is because I want people to feel like they mean something, like they belong to this world. I hope the people I'm greeting will feel the same way. So maybe they too will someday make their mark on the world. Now, at one level, that's sort of like, oh, isn't that cute? On another level, it's like this student thinking about, how can I make a difference in the world, even with something as simple as just greeting people? And not just thinking that, but actually conveying that and communicating that to her peers. And so you've got entire classrooms and armies of kids that are doing like one little thing like this, where they're actually sharing this. And frankly, when I saw this, I thought twice, like, yeah, maybe I will greet people more often, or say hi to people on the street. And they'll probably look at you weird, but at least it's something you can try. On a more serious note, this is a girl named Malala Yousafzai who maintained a blog. She's from Pakistan, and she was maintaining a blog in association with the BBC, kind of documenting her troubles and travails as a girl trying to go to school in Pakistan. And the powers that be in that region actually were not pleased with her complaints about how women were being treated, and so they actually shot this girl for expressing her views and her ideas. And so this is a little bit dark and morbid, but the point of it is that kids' voices matter, and if we give them a venue to share those voices, they can make an impact. And sometimes that can be risky business, but again, the point is that voice and audience matters. And so this, if you ever go to a education conference or something like that, you'll hear a lot of like buzzwords like collaboration, digital citizenship, communication, 21st century skills. And really what I think they're trying to say with these kinds of words is that we're thinking about school in a new way. And so John Moravec has this concept of schools 3.0, which is not the schools of like the 1850s, which probably persisted until like the 1990s. And then the internet came along. We kind of had the schools 2.0, where kids are kind of like creating content, not just consuming content. But the schools 3.0 concept, where not only are kids doing some of those things, but you actually can't tell the difference between kids creating or designing or playing or learning or imagining or working in school. Like, whatever they happen to be doing probably kind of fits into all of these categories at once. And so, just walking by a classroom with their door open and seeing kids quietly writing at their desk is probably not the best way to measure the level of productivity that's happening. And so I think of things like playing. That sounds almost a little whimsical, but it was good enough for Einstein. And so the nice thing about this collaboration idea, where students are coming together and really sharing their ideas, is they start to live out this sort of famous Newton quote about standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So everything we know and everything we do in our lives is because someone came before us and contributed to society. And so in a sort of a microcosm, creating content in a space like your class blogs or this digital portfolio where you maintain evidence of learning and you're sharing and growing together, it sort of, again, realizes this in sort of that micro level. Another way to say that quote is this way: everything I've done has been built on the awesomeness of others. And so this concept of awesomeness is this thing that it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but this Edward Herron, he's got a TED Talk or TEDx talk about this nomad movement, K-N-O-W, mad, where basically you can go anywhere as long as you have a laptop and an internet connection of some kind, and you can create amazing things no matter where you go. So it's sort of changing the way we think about living and working, and I think it's all about being producers and makers of amazing content and connecting with others. And put simply, Marco Torres, a teacher in the Los Angeles area, says that sharing is learning. So simply by the act of sharing something you're doing, you are bringing about this learning process within you, and you're also facilitating it in other students' lives. Now, the big question that teachers always get hung up on is, okay, sharing is learning. That sounds nice. How do you measure it? I found that picture and thought, that reminds me of something. And so this concept of the bubble test is something that's so ingrained in our society, and I'm not here to bash standardized tests per se, but we think we're making these strides just by putting some of these things on computers and saying, oh, it's sort of adaptive. It's still a bubble test, and it's still multiple choice, and it's still not getting at the heart of what and how kids are actually learning in schools today. And so I think of this sort of revolutionary way where this student's portfolio is the assessment. It's not, can I take this and then translate that into a bubble on a test or on a computer? And so I think this test matches very closely to this world, which we are sort of rapidly leaving behind, because we're entering an age where it's the age of Google. You don't need to know like the definition of something necessarily, or you can look anything up you want to look up. So we really need to know how to think and how to decide how to solve some of these problems, because this is the office space of tomorrow. Or today, I should say. This is a startup in San Francisco, and this is their office. Like, I wouldn't have abandoned the software world if this was my picture, right? Like, if this is office space and that's Bill Lumberg, maybe that's a pretty cool situation, right? So this is also manifesting itself locally. So this is Coco in downtown Minneapolis. And right here you have this just gorgeous open space at the Grain Exchange on 4th Street. And you have, perhaps 50 companies at one time sort of sharing this office space and literally just kind of connecting and chatting and getting work done in the context of this really dynamic living, breathing ecosystem. And so this to me is where we go when you think about students starting to create content of their own and start to connect in their little micro world. This is the end product of that. And so again, the goal is to go from this to something more like this, where you have this kind of cafe classroom that mirrors more of a coffee shop atmosphere where people can just kind of come and go and they all have their own tools and they can work independently, but they can also work together. And I guess my favorite facet of this picture is that here's the teacher in the back kind of being like, huh? Okay. Keep working, and it's really, you talk about student-centric, this really is student-centric. And in fact, in order for the principal to get this to happen, he said that he had to literally throw away or I guess recycle or donate the desks. And so there was no other alternative but to do this. So sometimes you have to take some drastic measures to get there. And so coming full circle, this is all about giving students a voice, an authentic audience for a meaningful purpose so that they can display their awesomeness to the world. And so I hope we can all do that together. Thanks.